Carl Jung, the real reason your life feels empty and confused. There's a specific kind of emptiness that doesn't scream. It hums quietly beneath the surface of your life. It's not dramatic, not obvious. In fact, from the outside, everything might look fine. You have a job, maybe even a good one. You have friends, you laugh, you post, you scroll, you get by. But something inside you feels off. Like a room you're always standing in, but never quite able to decorate. You wake up with a weight you can't name. You catch yourself wondering, is this it? And when you try to explain it, even to yourself, it slips through your fingers. Confused, you might call it burnout, or anxiety, or boredom. But Carl Jung would say, no, this is something deeper. This is the soul signaling that you're out of alignment, that you're living someone else's idea of who you should be, and until you confront that, no success, no relationship, no amount of productivity will ever feel like enough. Jung had a term for this silent war within the self, the divided psyche. He believed that every human being carries within them a deep, often unconscious conflict between the person they present to the world and the person they actually are. The outer self, the persona, is designed to help you fit in. It's the mask you put on to survive social life, to be liked, to be understood, to play your role. But beneath that mask is something raw and real. The self. Not your ego, not your personality, but the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, known and unknown. And here's where the suffering begins. When the persona and the self grow too far apart, you begin to feel hollow. Because you're no longer living your life. You're living a role. A mask that's been fused to your skin.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
We're taught from a young age to build that mask. We're praised for being agreeable, successful, efficient, attractive, whatever the dominant culture deems valuable. But we're rarely taught how to listen to the voice within. The one that doesn't care about social norms, the one that whispers strange, inconvenient truths, the one that dreams, imagines, revels. Over time, that voice gets quieter, not because it's gone, but because we've stopped listening. And when this happens, confusion sets in, not because we don't know what to do, but because we've forgotten how to feel what's true. We've lost the compass, and without it, life becomes a series of external moves, new goals, new jobs, new people, new dopamine hits, but none of it sticks, none of it lands, because the inner self has been abandoned, and it's not coming back until you come looking. Jung believed that the only way to resolve this inner conflict is to turn inward, not in a shallow self-help kind of way, not by journaling your goals or optimizing your morning routine, but by courageously entering the realm of the unconscious. Your dreams, your fears, your instincts, your forgotten desires. If you've ever had a dream that haunted you or a sudden emotion that made no sense, that was the unconscious trying to break through, trying to remind you that there's more to you than what you show the world. The problem? We're terrified of what we might find. So we distract ourselves. We scroll, we binge, we work, we pretend. But the emptiness remains. The real reason your life feels empty and confused isn't because you're broken, it's because you've been disconnected from yourself. from the parts of you that don't fit into neat categories, from the wild, creative, irrational forces that make you you. And the confusion you feel, that's not dysfunction, that's a symptom of awakening. It's the early stage of individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole. It's messy, it's painful, but it's necessary, because without it, you'll always be chasing someone else's dream with someone else's voice in your head. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this. Whose life are you living? Is it yours, or is it a version you learned to perform? What desires have you silenced because they didn't fit the script? What parts of yourself have you buried just to be accepted? And what might happen if you stopped running from your confusion and started listening to it? Because Jung would say that confusion is not the enemy. It's the beginning, the crack in the persona, the moment the self starts to stir. And if you're brave enough to follow that thread, to explore the dreams, the symbols, the emotions you've ignored, then something incredible begins to happen. The emptiness starts to fade, not because you filled it with more stuff, but because you finally made contact with the part of you that was waiting to be seen. The shadow within. Why repressing your darkness is destroying your potential. Most of us grow up believing that being good means being agreeable, polite, positive, and self-sacrificing. We're taught to smile through discomfort, to avoid conflict, to suppress what's inconvenient or intense, and while society rewards this behavior with acceptance and approval, Carl Jung warned that this kind of selective selfhood comes at a devastating cost, because every time you push down a part of yourself, your anger, your jealousy, your ambition, your lust, your fear, you don't destroy it, you exile it, you force it into what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious vault where all the disowned pieces of your psyche live. And over time, the more you repress, the more disconnected and exhausted you become, until one day you look around and realize you don't even recognize yourself anymore. Jung didn't see the shadow as inherently evil, he saw it as misunderstood. The shadow isn't the part of you that's wrong, it's the part of you that's real but unacknowledged. It holds the emotions you weren't allowed to feel, the desires you were told to suppress, the power you were encouraged to hide. And when you repress these things, they don't go away, they become toxic. They leak out in passive-aggressive behavior, self-sabotage, anxiety, projection, and depression. You think you're in control, but really, you're being controlled by the very forces you refuse to face. The irony is brutal. In trying to be good, you become fragmented. In trying to be safe, you become lost. Let's stop here for a second and ask a brutal question. What part of you do you most fear being seen? Is it your rage, your sexuality, your selfishness, your need for attention? Whatever it is, that's where the shadow lives. And until you face it, until you bring it into the light, it will control you from the dark. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's one of the most haunting lines in all of psychology, because it means that the life you think is happening to you might actually be a reflection of the parts of yourself you've refused to integrate. This is why life often feels like a loop. You keep dating the same type of person, you keep sabotaging your goals, you keep repeating the same emotional patterns, and no matter how much you journal or meditate or set goals, nothing changes because you're trying to heal on the surface while ignoring the root. And the root is always in the shadow. You have to go down before you can rise. You have to confront the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. And when you do, you discover something shocking. Those parts aren't monsters. They're messengers. They're fragments of your soul trying to return home. Reclaiming the shadow is not about indulging your worst impulses. It's about understanding them. It's about recognizing that your anger might be pointing to a boundary that's been crossed, that your jealousy might reveal a desire you haven't owned, that your sadness might be mourning a life you never let yourself pursue. When you listen to the shadow, it stops screaming. It starts guiding. It becomes an ally in your evolution, not a saboteur. But this takes courage, because confronting the shadow means letting go of the image you've carefully built. It means risking rejection. It means standing in front of a mirror and seeing yourself without the mask. And that's terrifying, but it's also liberating, because only when you reclaim your shadow do you become whole. Only then do you stop being ruled by unconscious fears and start living from integrated strength. So let me ask you, what hidden part of you is begging to be seen, not as a flaw, but as a source of power? What would happen if you stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be real? Because the real reason your life feels hollow isn't because you're missing something outside, it's because you're missing a part of yourself. And that part is waiting in the dark, not to destroy you, but to wake you up. The forgotten self, why you must lose your identity to find your purpose. There's a moment in every honest life, quiet but seismic, when we realize that the person we've been trying so hard to become is not who we truly are. It's disorienting. You've spent years building an identity, the achiever, the nice one, the dependable one, the rebel, the intellectual, the spiritual seeker. You've worn these titles like armor, convinced that if you could just perfect this version of yourself, life would finally make sense. People would love you, you'd feel secure, purpose would arrive. But then it doesn't. And beneath the surface, something begins to ache. You feel like a stranger in your own life, like you've been cast in a role you didn't audition for, and the lines no longer make sense. Carl Jung would say, this is not a breakdown, it's an invitation. An invitation to lose the identity you've clung to so you can finally find the self you've buried. The ego, the constructed identity, is not evil, it's necessary. We all need a sense of self to navigate the world, to form relationships, to survive. But the problem arises when the ego becomes the whole story, when we mistake who we think we are for who we really are. Jung warned that the ego is only a small island floating on the sea of the unconscious, and the more we try to live only on that island, safe, contained, familiar, the more we cut ourselves off from the vastness of our deeper being. And that's when life starts to feel shallow, repetitive, directionless. Because you weren't meant to live on the surface, you were meant to dive. Losing your identity doesn't mean losing yourself. It means dismantling the false layers so the deeper self can emerge. The self, in Jungian terms, is the totality of your being. It's the blueprint of your wholeness, the inner compass that knows your path even when you don't. and the tragedy is that most of us never meet it. We stay locked in ego games, chasing validation, ticking boxes, proving our worth. We build a life that looks good from the outside but feels empty inside. And then we wonder why fulfillment never arrives. But how can it? Fulfillment is not a reward for playing the game well. It's the byproduct of living in alignment with your true nature, and that alignment can only be found once the false identity begins to dissolve. Think of it like a snake shedding its skin. The skin isn't bad, it served a purpose, but once it's outgrown, it becomes a prison. Many of us are walking around in outdated versions of ourselves, clinging to personas that no longer serve us, afraid that if we let go, we'll disappear. But the opposite is true. When the false identity dies, the true self begins to live. And what emerges is not just a new personality, but a new relationship to life itself. Purpose begins to reveal itself not as a goal to chase, but as a state of being to embody. You're no longer performing, you're participating. But make no mistake, this process is painful. The death of identity feels like chaos. Old ambitions fall apart, relationships shift or end. The things you used to care about suddenly feel meaningless. You grieve, not just what you're losing, but the illusion that it was ever truly you. And in that space of loss, something sacred begins to stir. Silence, stillness, a deeper knowing that doesn't scream for attention, but waits patiently for you to notice. So I'll ask you now, with no judgment, who are you trying to be, and who would you be if you stopped trying? What mask are you still wearing that feels more like a burden than a home? Because Jung's truth is this: you cannot find your purpose while clinging to a false identity. You must let something die, and in that death you'll discover not emptiness, but the beginning of everything real. The path to wholeness, how embracing your brokenness leads to meaning. We spend so much of our lives trying to fix ourselves. We chase healing like it's a destination, something we can arrive at if we just read one more book, attend one more workshop, meditate for one more hour. We tell ourselves that once we're finally healed, we'll be worthy of love, of purpose, of peace. But Carl Jung offered a different path, one that is not about fixing your brokenness, but embracing it. Because the truth is, what we call broken is often just unintegrated. It's not the wound that blocks your growth, it's the refusal to face it. And the very parts of ourselves we're most ashamed of are often the keys to our meaning. Wholeness, in Jung's view, is not perfection, it's integration. It's the union of opposites, the light and dark, the conscious and unconscious, the rational and instinctual. It's when you stop dividing yourself into good and bad and begin to see every part of you as belonging. That includes the fear, the shame, the doubts, the trauma. These aren't blocks to your path, they are the path. They're the raw material your soul uses to evolve. And when you stop rejecting them, something shifts. The wound that once haunted you becomes the place where compassion grows. The mistake that once defined you becomes the lesson you give others. The pain you carried becomes the bridge that connects you to those who are still lost. None of this happens by accident. It happens when you choose to turn toward what hurts, not to wallow in it, but to understand it, to sit with it, to ask it what it needs rather than trying to silence it. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That is the work, to bring the buried to the surface, to face the mirror without flinching, to stop pretending you're fine when you're not, and to realize that your worth was never dependent on being fine in the first place. Meaning doesn't come from escaping suffering. It comes from finding purpose within it, from realizing that your story, exactly as it is, has value, that your struggles are not detours but instructions, and that every time you choose to face your shadow, to honor your truth, to live more authentically, you become a little more whole, a little more human, a little more real. So I'll leave you with this. What if the parts of you you've been trying to hide are the very ones meant to guide you? What if your brokenness isn't a flaw to be fixed, but a doorway to your deepest truth? Because in the end, the real reason your life feels empty and confused isn't because you're not enough, it's because you're not yet whole. And wholeness doesn't come from adding more, it comes from welcoming back everything you already are, even the broken pieces, especially them.